closing arguments, because in this one big meth case, the defense attorney kept saying, there's no substance in this case. There's no substance in this case. And I don't know how I got away with this, but closing argument, I had a kilo of coke in my hand. It was all wrapped up in cellophane really tight. And I held it in my hand. And I said, the defense attorney keeps saying there's no substance in this case. And I let it drop. A thud. There's your substance.
Okay, so for the listeners and viewers, we're going to do something a little bit different today. Up until this point, we've mainly been talking to, police officers, special agents, people that are in actually making the arrests. But with that being said, law enforcement officers cannot do their jobs without a good prosecutor. You can make all the arrests you want, but nobody goes to jail and nobody's held accountable unless you have a good prosecutor that will prosecute the cases. So in this case, I have a special guest here that I used to work with a lot, and we're just going to kind of take it from there. So can you introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Monte Stiles. I was born and raised in Idaho. Spent my entire career here with stints in D.C. I worked on the Hill a couple of times before as an attorney, and then did a DOJ assignment at Maine DOJ at one point in my career, but mostly worked out of Boise, Idaho on cases that went all over the world because of the nature of federal law and drug conspiracies.
Okay, and can you talk a little bit about, I'm assuming you grew up here in Idaho?
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I was born in Emmett. My parents, I had 4 younger siblings. My grandparents lived next door to us. My dad's parents lived across the alfalfa field. It was a small farm, 4,000 people. It was a great place to grow up. I couldn't have better family members, friends. It was a wonderful foundation for an entire life. And my folks, they're like 89. They still live in the same home I grew up in. And I just saw them Sunday. So
was there anything as you grew up, Monte, that led you to wanting to become a prosecutor as opposed to, was there something else that you wanted to do? Or was there some turning point in your life that said, hey, this is what I want to do?
Yeah, every kid goes through that phase. They're trying to figure out what they want. And it's mostly based on fantasy. I think my first memory is I wanted to be an oceanographer until I figured out, and this is when I was little, until I figured out how far the ocean was from Emmett, and I couldn't get home every night. And then I wanted to be Roy Rogers for a while, because all those cowboys on white horses that saved the day, that seemed like a cool thing. But I don't remember how early I thought being an attorney would be fun. And it was based on watching dramatic TV shows where there's cross-examination, drama in the courtroom. I thought that would be cool. So I think it's really unusual to hone in on being an attorney when you're 10 or 12 or whatever. But I never wavered from that.
So it was that young, at 10 or 12?
I have no idea what the age was. I just remember that was all I thought about in terms of education, what I was ultimately going to do. I didn't know what kind of law. I just knew the drama of the courtroom was what drew me to that.
Okay. And at that point, when you're 10 or 12, did you have any sense of what kind of cases you wanted to work on?
No, other than trial work. I wanted to be in that courtroom doing cross-examining witnesses, doing that kind of stuff. Okay.
And so where do you go to law school?
Went to law school at J. Reuben Clark. It's a law school, very good law school on the BYU campus in Provo. Loved it. Had great professors. The dean had been the prior Solicitor General for the United States. He was an amazing guy, and hated law school because I'm too hyperactive to sit and listen and theorize about stuff. I just wanted to do stuff. But I got through law school and got to be an attorney.
And so what was your first job that you did out of law school?
Well, I think how I became a prosecutor is interesting. The only classes I really liked were criminal law, criminal procedure, evidence, trial prep, all of that. The rest of it, contracts, wills and estates, I died 1,000 deaths in those classes. So I figured out that that's kind of what I wanted to do. And I had this very amazing, but kind of eccentric criminal law professor, Woody Dean. He was an old school prosecutor out of Southern California. And Woody used to tell the most amazing stories about murders and autopsies and catching bad guys and dramatic court events. And it was so much more interesting than figuring out what to do with somebody's estate, when they pass away. So I got super interested in that. And he really is the person that's responsible for me being a prosecutor. And when I decided I wanted to do that, knowing that he'd been involved in all of these huge cases, I went into his office one day and said, Professor Dean, I'd really like to be a prosecutor, but I need to know, you dealt with all of these really bad people. Did you ever worry about your personal safety or the safety of your family when you're doing that? Because I had to choose something where my family would be taken care of. And he just gave me this look, and he paraphrased something in Shakespeare. And he said, Mr. Stiles, cowards die many times before they're dead, but brave men die but once. That was it. That was all he said. And I thought a lot about that. I thought, you know what? There's a lot of things in life you can be afraid of. You can always be nervous about, but brave men die but once. So you just live your life and you do the best job you can, and you can't die before it's your time. And so he basically said, buck up, it's okay. And that's all I needed.
Okay. And so from that point, you decided to be a prosecutor. What's your first job?
After my first year in law school, I went back to work on Capitol Hill. My second semester, I went to Ada County Prosecutor's Office in Boise. Great office, biggest office in the state. Was basically a second year prosecutor, which meant in Idaho, you can have a limited license to practice law as a second year. So I spent my summer at Ada County. I had my own cases, supervised, of course, but they're small cases. And I got to do real cases. And I thought, this is awesome. There weren't any huge, wonderful cases, there's small things. But I thought, I can't go back to law school. This is what I want to do. I can't go back to class. I like this, but I had to go back to class. But that sealed it for me. And of course, because of that experience and their experience with me, after law school, I was offered a job there. I actually had another job offer as I served the LDS mission in Korea. So I spoke Korean. I was offered a job, a huge amount of money, right out of law school to go live in Seoul and be an attorney. I would be very, very wealthy had I gone there. I took a job at Ada County instead. I think my starting salary was like $16,500, which friends that never went to college were making more money than that. But I've never, ever regretted it. So right out of law school, I went to Ada County, got a caseload like everybody does, small things, shoplifting, killed too many duck cases, had one case, cow at large. I also had a cougar at large case at one point. But as it always works, you start with small cases and you work your way up. And pretty soon I was doing grand thefts, robberies, rapes, ultimately homicides, doing every imaginable case. And very quickly realized my real interests were in drug cases. And one of the reasons for that was we would sit in court every day, whether they're pleas or trials or sentencings. And I quickly recognized that most of the people that were in the criminal justice system were there because of an underlying substance abuse problem. They were either using drugs, and that could be illegal drugs they used too much, that were causing them to have bad judgment or do something that hurt someone else, or they were trying to find a way to support their habit. So I see all those people going through the system, realize that's the root cause of most of this, most of our problems. And so I thought, I don't want to be a little guy, the big banyan tree on the little step ladder clipping off leaves out here one at a time. I wanted to get to the roots. And I thought if I got involved in drug cases, that the roots get cut off, that would help everything. And I still believe that's true. I don't think we do enough of it, but I felt that was true. And so I asked my boss at the time if we could form a task force. Never had happened in Idaho. I asked and we started doing big cases. You and I many, many times talked about, you take off somebody, if you don't take out the organization, you don't do much good. So we started doing things. We instituted the first grand jury in Idaho. We started doing wiretaps. I remember the first wiretap we did, I think we arrested 30 people, and wiretaps just weren't done. And so I got really, really interested in complex drug cases with the idea of taking out organizations, not just people.
And that was still at the state level?
State level, yeah. I spent a year in juvie doing all the everything related to juvenile behavior, mental illness, child abuse, that kind of stuff, for a year. That gave me a lot of insight into what's happening with our kids and why they get in trouble. Sometimes it's because their parents model bad behavior. A lot of times it's just the popular culture. It's their friends. It's what they think is cool, and they make bad decisions. But I came out of that with an even more convinced that substance abuse was the underlying problem in almost every case. So went back, did the drug thing 2 or 3 years. At one point, our mutual friend, Greg Gleason, came to me. He was a special agent, IRS agent who worked for the Federal Drug Task Force. And I don't know how we got to know each other, but he came over and asked me if I would be a special assistant, special assistant at AUSA, which meant I kept my main job, but I would be deputized to handle federal cases in certain circumstances where the case warranted. So I did that for a little while. Then the OSADEF attorney, which is the Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force, which you and I worked on, which is basically a group of agents, analysts, prosecutors who identify the biggest, baddest, meanest, nastiest drug traffickers they can find, and then do an investigation. A lot of times it would be months, sometimes even years, and then prosecute those people with the idea of taking out organizations, taking it as far as we could, and not only putting people in prison, bad people, but taking away all their assets. So it was a two-tier approach. You investigate their drug trafficking, you investigate their money, and you take it all, because the money part allows them a opportunity to have power, influence. So if you don't take that away, you're really missing something. So after being a special assistant U.S. attorney for a while, the OSADEF attorney, the lead OSADEF attorney, left, and I was hired to take that person's place.
And was that assistant United States attorney position?
Yeah, that was 5 years. After 5 years of being a county prosecutor, I went to the U.S. Attorney's Office in Boise, and I was called the lead OSADEF attorney. And so I had the most amazing career working on big drug cases with the best agents anywhere. And we worked as a team. And an advantage of that kind of job is we've talked before about reactive versus proactive cases. A reactive case is there's a crime committed, the police do an investigation, they come in, they drop it on your desk, you figure out what to do and go from there. When you're doing a proactive investigation, and I loved this part of it, is I would work with the agencies in doing the investigation. So we would plot out the strategy, we would work on tactics to figure out what these people are doing, how they're doing it, what their motives were, their operation. And then as a team, different agencies with agents with different strengths would do parts of the investigation, and as the case built, we'd identify people that were prosecutable, what their crimes are, where their assets were, and ultimately bring it down to where we're doing search warrants all over the place, arresting people, seizing assets, and taking them into federal court. And it was awesome. It was something that we knew was making a difference, and we take out some really, really bad people and basically shut them down.
So Monte, when did you start as a prosecutor with Ada County, and then when did you start as an AUSA?
Wow. Let's see, I think I started at Ada County in 1982, and 5 years later, I think 5 years later, or maybe 81, 5 years later went to the U.S. Attorney's Office. And I think I was there 28 years and 28 years, I can't remember. Spent my whole career with the Drug Task Force.
And so one question I've always wondered about you, because and here's the thing. Did you start with this philosophy when you were Ada County prosecutor? Most prosecutors, especially in drug cases, want to do a buy bust, which is just you go out, buy drugs, arrest the guy, and move on to the next one.
Yeah.
Simple, easy, whatever else. But with you, it was always big conspiracies. We would do cases with 30, 40, 50 defendants. Did you always have that philosophy, even when you were Ada County prosecutor? Where did that develop? Where did that idea come from?
Buy busts are boring. They could be fun if it's like a big one, but for the most part, back then under state law, there were no mandatory minimums for drug traffickers, no matter how big the case. So basically, because no defendant, no matter how much dope they had, went to jail, because there was no mandatory minimums, nobody cooperated, and therefore you could never move up in an organization. You're stuck with whatever dumb person that got caught. So I realized that we had to do more than just catch the guys that were dumb enough to sell to a CI or an undercover. And one of our biggest cases was earlier in our career, we did a wiretap. When you do a wiretap, you basically listen, get a court authorization to listen to everything they're saying on the phone. And so you figure out that guy, that woman, here's what they're doing, how they're doing it, when they're doing it, follow their movements, document everything, end up doing search warrants. So I think the first wiretap we did was like 30 defendants. And I just saw that as much more valuable, because if you take out one guy, someone just replaces them. And if you don't take away their assets, they still have the juice, the resources to buy more and to keep going.
But did you start that with Ada County as well?
Yeah.
And so why didn't I always found it bewildering working with you or during my career or whatever else that other AUSAs or other prosecutors didn't have that same philosophy. They just wanted to do the easy buy bust, take them off. Why do you think other prosecutors didn't have the same attitude that you did?
I can't speak for them, but I didn't want a 9-to-5 job where I just called it in every day and worked 8 hours, 9 hours, 12 hours. I wanted to make a difference. And I had the luxury of having agents that felt the same way. We wanted to kick butt and take names, because the people we were dealing with were it's not your addict dealer. It's like criminal organizations, organized crime, cartels, those kind of people. And they demanded a special level of attention. So it was a lot more fun, challenging to do those kind of cases. The end result was much better because in some of our cases, as we went along, we prosecuted people that didn't even touch the dope, because a lot of big time drug dealers, they're not the one moving the dope. They've got these people down here doing it all. They don't touch it. They just count the money, move the money around. So these kind of investigations allowed us to go after people that were bigger and had important roles, different roles, and again, take out organizations. I think my interest in those kind of cases also came from the fact I loved the investigation part. I loved that part. It's just the planning, the tactics, the strategies, whatever went into it. And you don't want me talking about you, but you're one of a handful of agents who never stopped an investigation. No matter how much evidence we got piled up, if there was a chance to get more, even to the point of we're in trial and you're still out finding more stuff. And that was just awesome. And I loved the investigation part. And in some ways, I knew I wasn't a law enforcement agent, but I felt part of that team. I got to help make strategy decisions. My people, I didn't feel like I was any different than them. We were all part of a team.
Well, let's talk about that, because I have dealt with prosecutors where I take them the case, and that's the last thing I ever hear from them. But with you, that was never the case. It was always a team environment. It was always, hey, I'm thinking about doing this, or what do you think about this? Can you give me advice about that? So where did you come up with that philosophy that is different than other prosecutors who would just go, yeah, you're just the cop, or you're just the law enforcement guy. Let me handle this and we'll just go from there? Because through the whole process, even through up until sentencing, you and I were always talking about what you thought or what we thought was the best thing.
Yeah.
So where'd you come up with that?
Because it was a team. It's nothing unique to me. It's just the way things work successfully. A lot of people don't like attorneys, and there's a reason they don't like attorneys. The best advice I ever got in law school, other than cowards die many times, was Woody Deem again, Professor Deem, said to treat everyone you work with the same. Doesn't matter if it's the receptionist, the secretary, the person who cleans offices at night, you treat everyone the same. You don't act better, you don't think you're better. And so, and really that goes back to my childhood too, is just treat everybody as having worth, and that I'm not any smarter, better than anybody else. So I really loved the team approach because it felt like a team. My success was your success. It was the success because of the work of many. And it was just, that's how things worked well. So it wasn't any brilliant idea of mine. It was just, that's just the way it is.
So how about, I mean, we talked a little bit about this before we started recording. You know, there's a lot of ideas out there in the public, and there's a lot of, and sometimes justified, of prosecutors have too much power.
Yeah.
There's just too much. I never got that impression from you ever, because you always treated people fairly, at least in my opinion. Why do you think you never got that idea that, you know, oh my gosh, I'm the prosecutor, I can do whatever I want, and you're gonna pay for this?
It's a really good question. I think one of the things I learned from being a child and being a prosecutor was that all people have something good in them. They make choices along the way that are bad. They may may hurt people, they may do all kinds of terrible things. But ultimately, at their core, there's some good in every person. And because of their choices, they have to face consequences. But one of the things that helped us be successful is that we would put these cases together that defendants could not squirm out of, they could not excuse their way out of. So we had them. And because of mandatory minimum sentences, their only way out, their only way to reduce their sentence was to cooperate. So it didn't matter how big the defendant was. In the end, they would be sitting in handcuffs and orange coveralls talking to you and I or Greg Gleason or someone. And we would be interviewing them about their entire lives because they were required to cooperate. Cooperation in that case meant they told us everything. How they started, who they worked with, where they got their dope, where their money was, everything. Because if they didn't, we were not going to ask the judge to reduce their mandatory minimum. So we had this unique experience or opportunity to investigate people from the outside, figure out everything they were doing, but ultimately to hear it from their own lips. So you've got the benefit of all of these things, but ultimately they told us all of that, and we could determine this is consistent with what we know here, and they're not telling us the truth. We'd figure out a way to explain to them they needed to tell us the truth. So we got to know most of our defendants in some way. Doesn't mean we became pals with them, but we got to see a different side of them. And for the most part, when that happened, and you see how they got to that point in their life, and in that situation, they are kind of humble. They've been in jail, their stuff has been taken away, and they're wanting to make good decisions. They're wanting to help themselves out. And so you see a different side. It's not the arrogant, I'm going to shoot you kind of defendant. It's like, okay, guys, you got me. Here's what happened. This is what I did. I'm ready. I'm owning up to it. I'm ready to take. And so it got to see him in a different light. And in a lot of cases, I mean, people would try to scam us, of course. They always do. They get religion, whatever. But when you talk to people at that level, no matter how bad they are, you see things about them that you see that little kernel of good in them. Or you see that mistakes that they made, they could have made a different decision and had a whole different life. I think there's probably only 5, 6 people my whole career that just seemed inherently evil, that there was no way to see any light in their eyes or in their heart. They were just plain evil. And but other than that, I think most of the people I dealt with, ultimately you could see the human part as well as the stuff they did that hurt other people, hurt themselves, and you balance those two things. So, and I think because of that, it helped us see people for who they were and create a resolution that it was fair to them, that seemed fair to them, was fair, and the judge would accept, and through mutual work, cases are resolved in a way that were fair. Now, not everybody was happy with the end result, but they always knew that we treated them fairly, whether they liked the end result or not.
Well, and that's interesting because I wanted to ask you about, because I never got to see this. I mean, we talk about it a little bit afterwards, but I never, in talking to the defense attorneys, I mean, I think it's fair to say, 100, 200 defense attorneys that, you would deal with because of cases that we did. I never had defense attorneys go, that dude's bad. I don't like him. He's treating us unfairly. To a man or woman, every single defense attorney I always spoke with where your name came up, it was always, yep, that guy's a great guy, always treated us fairly and everything else. How were those negotiations with the defense attorneys?
That's an interesting point, because I didn't always perceive that they thought it was okay, because you're in the adversarial role, and they're not like defendants, but in a way, they would be in this boom boom at the beginning, and as the evidence, they start to see the evidence and they see what's going to happen, and they start to negotiate. They kind of come around too, where they see us as crucial to their client's best interest, and so the relationship would start to change. How do we resolve this case in a fair way? And I hope that they recognize that, number one, all I was interested in was the truth. Number two, I really did adhere to the rule of prosecutors, the standard for prosecutors, and that was this: our job is not to win. Our job is to see that justice is done. And justice is what the guilty fear. So if justice meant a particular resolution, even if it's different than what we originally thought, that's our goal. Our goal wasn't to put another notch in our belt to win. Our job was to see that justice was done. But because of the kind of cases we put together, there was never any question of whether these people did what we charged them with. And so justice meant they had to be accountable for those things. And so I hope that people knew that I wasn't interested in reputation or salary or awards or just winning at all costs. It was really myself and my team. The truth was the only thing that mattered, and justice was important. And that their clients were real people. And as long as they dealt with us fairly and honestly, that's the relationship we had. If they're trying shenanigans, making stuff up, we were not nice to them. We would make sure that they didn't get away with that. Whether it was during an investigation, negotiations, trial, whatever it was, normal tactics did not work because we didn't let that happen. So I can't say that I was friends with all of them. Most of them I respected, and as long as they adhered to the truth, as long as they were not nasty to me personally, we got along fine, and it was fine. The hardest part is when you're in court and the defense attorney is saying things about my agents or about me or about the government in general that just wasn't true. And I knew they knew it wasn't true. That's where we had real problems. But I still talk to them. My general rule is I'd prefer not to be around attorneys of any kind. I'd rather hang out with cops, and sometimes even defendants, because some of my defendants, because they knew we treated them fairly, still talk to me. And I could tell you lots of stories. I've had communications with two major defendants in the last week who've kept in contact with me for 10, 20, 25 years that still talk to me because they knew we treated them fairly. In fact, one of them, I can't say too much because I don't want to identify. Recently told me a very, very cool thing, that they were proud of the fact they were going to get their 25-year pin from NA. They were very proud of that. And they attributed their life to getting arrested, that stopped their criminal activity, stopped their use, stopped them from hurting more people, got them into treatment, and their lives changed. And you hear something like that, you think, okay, might not happen in all cases, but getting held accountable for things you do is often a turning point. It gives you opportunity to start a new life. So I really like talking to people like that. And they wouldn't contact me if they didn't think that they'd been treated fairly, and I wouldn't talk to them if I didn't think they'd changed their life and just wanted to share good news, which I love.
Can you talk a little bit, tell the viewers and listeners, most people aren't familiar with what minimum mandatories are.
Sure.
Can you talk about what they are and why they are important?
Yeah. So in the drug world, a lot of states and the federal statutes require a mandatory minimum without parole sentence based on a certain quantity of drugs. So if you meet a threshold quantity of coke, meth, fentanyl, whatever it is, you're going to go to jail for this amount. And if you have this amount, you're going to go to prison this amount. And no amount of whining, crying, coming to Jesus, none of that works unless people cooperate. And that forces they literally have the key to the prison door in some respect, because the cooperation puts their head in a whole different place. They have to admit what they did and confess, basically, in order to reduce their sentence. So that mandatory minimums put a tremendous amount of incentive for defendants to cooperate. Without cooperation, your investigation stops at them, because they're the ones that know this. And as you go up the ladder, you get higher and higher, more and more. And so those are critical. Without mandatory minimums, and in today's society, so-called criminal justice reform is to dumb everything down, is to not charge people in the first place, not apply the laws evenly, fairly, and pat people on the head and tell them to go away. And there's not consequences. And in that situation, basically all you do is you catch small-time dealers that are often addicts, and you don't move up the ladder. So mandatory minimums are absolutely critical, because without those, there's no sure consequences. No one has the incentive to cooperate, and the big guys get away. So some states are moving away from that. It's a terrible, terrible mistake. People have to understand their consequences. People have to understand that unless they get their acts together and they help solve some of the problems they created, they're not getting a break. It's the best thing ever. And if we get away from that, we're doomed. We might as well give up. That being said, people that were not subject to mandatory minimums, in the federal system, we didn't even prosecute people that were below a certain threshold of drugs. We treated them as cooperating witnesses. Sometimes we would send them to state court to have a sentence that wasn't a mandatory minimum case. Sometimes they would be treated as simply as witnesses, and we try to get them into treatment programs, help them get their acts together, because again, justice was the goal. And if someone was redeemable, someone was fixable, and they were helping us, we wanted them to be successful. So to me, it's all good, and without that, we would be wasting a lot of time.
How about your relationship with judges?
This is interesting. I originally wanted to be a trial attorney because I saw all the courtroom drama, the cross-examination, the defendant confessing on the stand to the murder, all of this great stuff. And that's what I thought court was like. I get to court, and there's very little of that. You have a 2-week trial, you may have 10 minutes of that, but the rest of the time it's objection, sustained. Oh, Mr. Stiles, you shouldn't be that excited about things, and tone it down, and you're being argumentative. Well, Judge, the whole point is to argue our case and be passionate about our case. Well, defense attorneys didn't like that. Judges didn't like that. So I found myself in a situation where this amount of courtroom drama was reduced to this. And that was a big shock to me, because That's what I thought court was, and I was sadly mistaken about that. Now, having said that, the times there was courtroom drama, it was super fun. When you catch a defendant or witness lying and you can point it out, it's super fun, because most defendants kind of pathological. They're so used to lying, and they think they can get away with it. So when you catch them in their lies and they go, uh-oh, it's super fun. When you catch a defense attorney pulling some shenanigans and that gets pointed out, super fun. In a closing argument, I loved closing arguments, because in this one big meth case, the defense attorney kept saying, there's no substance in this case. There's no substance in this case. And I don't know how I got away with this, but closing argument, I had a kilo of Coke in my hand. It was all wrapped up in cellophane really tight. And I held it in my hand. And I said, the defense attorney keeps saying there's no substance in this case. And I let it drop. A thud. There's your substance. And I don't know if the defense attorney and the judge were kind of, uh-oh, what? But everybody seemed stunned and nobody said anything bad. In another case, another time, their defense attorneys were saying it's a big marijuana case. Oh, just a bunch of skinny plants up in the hills, until I asked the agents to bring in boxes that were like 15 feet long of marijuana plants, because these were huge marijuana plants, and ask them to come in the back door. And they're hauling in these things, and the minute they come in, this courtroom reeked of marijuana, and it was just a dramatic, fun thing. So I had moments of that, but for the most part, judges discouraged that. The best judges were the ones that treated me and my agents, the way we treated defense attorneys and defendants, and that was fairly. And the worst judges were the ones that would listen to defense attorneys make claims about my agents that were lies, and they treated them as having as much credibility as we had. And they'd often allow them to get away with murder, and we were held to very high standards, that was fine with me. But the judges that allowed them to get away with murder, like I remember one case, the defense attorney alleged that my case agent and I tried to influence a juror outside the courtroom, which is a complete lie. And we had this big hearing as a big drama thing. At the end, the judge found out it was a complete lie, but he never looked at the defense attorney and said, you made this up, your client made this up, and you need to apologize to that agent. Never happened. So that was my biggest problem, is it seemed like I had different standards, and that was my biggest problem.
Well, where do you think that came from? Because, I obviously spent a lot of time in court with you, and there were judges that I thought just fair, neutral. Yeah. And then there were other judges, like you said, that seemed to side a little bit more with the defense. And I do remember on one case that you and I did, which was, well, Mr. Stiles, you have all the resources of the federal government behind you. And I'm just kind of looking at you, and you're looking at me going, well, it's just us, right?
It's just us.
But do you think a judge in that case, do you think he just thought the government had overwhelming power, so he just wanted to side a little bit on the defense attorney's side, for lack of a better term, or what do you think that was all about?
I think sometimes it's just the makeup of the judge's own personality, where they went to law school, their philosophy. Probably some of it came from the fact that they knew prosecutors, maybe not in Boise, Idaho, but elsewhere, that did abuse power. They did want to just win. I think that was very rare back when you and I did cases, at least the ones I knew. But the rules are skewed in favor of defendants anyway. They get everything, but they get to hide the ball from us. We tell them everything, and they get to hold these little secret things in the back to spring on us, and they can make up stuff all they want. We're held to a standard. Everything has to be true. And if there's something in our case that's not good for us, that hurts our case, we have to give that too, and we do. That's not the case with them. So there's a lot of rules and procedures that are in the defendant's favor. And even the verdict, they have to be found guilty beyond a reasonable doubt by 12 people. Just one of those 12, if they go, nah, I don't know, the defendant wins. There's lots of things that are in their favor. They're presumed to be innocent. They have lots of rights. And so that's okay, because we know the rules. We know that's what we're dealing with. But the only real problem I ever had is when a judge would treat us differently and question our motives, or listen to some defense attorney who's making something up and give them credibility or defendant credibility, when we had a track history of 15 years with this judge. They knew that wasn't the way we did things. So that was part of it. Another part of it is you take a drug dealer, a drug trafficker who, pack guns, point guns at people, threaten to kill them, move all this dope, ruin a bunch of lives. Well, in court, they have their defense attorney, and they're sitting there in a suit, all cleaned up and all nice, and a defendant who's just a scumbag. The judge is saying, well, Mr. So-and-so, what would you like me to do? Mr. So-and-so, please have a seat. Mr. So-and-so, are you okay today? What can I do for you? That was a little bit hard to take, because that's the person the jurors saw too. And so anything we did to kind of show the defense attorney, the jury, what this person was like in reality, that made people uncomfortable. And the judges did not like us being too demonstrative in our presentations, whether it was a witness or me. Mm. Another problem I had is I couldn't stand still. We have a podium, and in the old, watching these old lawyer shows, you see the defense attorney wandering around the courtroom and getting right there in front of the jury and looking at them. Well, that didn't happen. We're supposed to be at this podium. I can't stand still for anything, and so I'm stuck to this podium, and felt like a trapped animal, especially in federal court. And so I would start to wander away from the podium, and I'd get further. It was like on a leash. I get further and further away till I'm way over here, and I'm going back and forth. And the judge would say, Mr. Stiles, you're supposed to be there. Oh, sorry, Judge, I'll get back there. But within 2 minutes, I'm doing this again. And I think finally they kind of gave up, but because I couldn't stand still. But that was something else that was a revelation to me, is that you stand behind a podium and speak to jurors way over there. It's not very effective. And so that was another thing that I realized that was different than my perception of what trial work would be.
Okay. So, question for you. We talked a little bit before we started recording. So I came over from Seattle. I had some good cases over there, multi-defendant. Think it made a difference. But as soon as I was transferred here and started working with you, I felt that we were really making a difference in the community. And one of the reasons was, and it was one of the cases we worked on, was the big ecstasy case. Mm-hmm. But one of the things I found very interesting is it wasn't just about prosecuting the defendants in the case. Whether you were supposed to do this or not, you were reaching out to the media and getting articles about, hey, this is what's going on in your community. These are the effects of the going on the drugs. And then you were also going out and doing town halls and educating parents, kind of a multifaceted approach. Where did you come up with that?
I don't know that I came up with it. It just seemed to be the effective thing to do. So first of all, you've got a prosecution and you have defendants that have certain rights. And we have rules on what we can say outside of the courtroom. They're very strict rules. You can't really talk about the evidence, any of that. You're very limited in what you can say once a case is indicted. So, but at the same time, there were risks, there were dangers posed to the community, and in the rape cases, mostly with kids, 11, 12, 13 little kids going to these raves, that was life-threatening. And so, without talking about specific defendants or the evidence in our case, we would put out press that we're allowed to do, like when the trial is, how many defendants, that kind of stuff. But beyond that, we would put out information educating people about the dangers of these particular drugs, what was happening at raves, so that they would be warned about it. And telling adults is great, because we would see, in that case, we'd see parents dropping teenagers off at these raves, or drug dealers are running it, and they were clueless, because these raves were advertised as no drugs, no alcohol. Well, the bouncer at the door is one of the drug dealers. So they were stupidly dropping their kids off. And so we tried to educate them, but more than just the adults, we tried to educate the kids, help them understand what they were looking at. And you and I could tell lots of stories about the people in that case and the damage they did. So that just seemed to be a natural thing. And now I'm more involved in training and educating. And one of the things I always tell law enforcement groups is, you guys, your heads are filled with information about what really happens, what life is like out there. The people in the community do not know those things. They only see little snippets from the news, whatever they pick up, and none of that's real to them. It's just a headline. It's just a news story. It's not real. All of the stuff in your head needs to be shared with the public so they understand what's really happening in our communities. If you don't share it, they won't know. So I've had the blessing of having 10 years now of taking 30 years of experience and helping communities, families, kids, legislators understand what's really happening. This is what's happening on the ground. These are the consequences. This is what we need to do about it. And I love talking to kids. And I don't do a lot of drug education. Most of it's talking to them, teaching them leadership skills, helping them see all the fun things there are to do in life that's infinitely more fascinating and rewarding than anything the drug culture offers them. I love working with kids. But I also understand a lot of adults think that we got to fix the kids and that'll fix the problem. It's a big lie. When somebody calls me, Fort Myers, Florida calls and said, Monty, we want you to come to Florida and talk to our kids. It's a typical call. Okay, what do you want me to do when I'm there? Well, we want you to do an hour talk at an assembly. And why do you want that? Well, the essence is we want you to fix our kids. So I've had this conversation so many times. It's kind of fun. I'll go, so you want to have me come from Boise, Idaho to talk to your kids for an hour. Do you think that's going to fix them? Dead silence. Dead silence. I said, that's not the solution. If you want me to come, here's what we need to do. First thing you need to do is when I'm there, put me in a room full of community stakeholders, the people who make laws, policies, budgets, the people who influence what happens in this community. Put me in a room with them for an hour and a half and let me explain to them why they're having problems and what they can do to make their communities better and especially help their kids. If you can't do that, I probably can't come. Sure, put me with kids in an assembly, but also put me with some youth leaders who want to make a difference, because I want to train them on how they can help their peers. Guys like me, I'm not going to be there every day. I can't fix them in an hour, but if you motivate, educate, activate youth, they make miracles happen. So those go from 1 hour talk from morning till night, talking to various groups. And when I leave, I feel like, I helped them accomplish something that may have hopefully long-lasting effects. And that feels good. It makes me feel like everything we went through, suffered, enjoyed, experienced was worth it, because that information can get relayed to people in a real way, in a convincing way. You don't just talk to them through their ears or fill their heads. You get them here. And that's what cops can do, is those stories that they know, those real life stories, get people here. And that's really the only way to change people, what they do. They have to feel it in here. They have to understand what it is, what's happening, and why they should care. And when they understand why they should care, they're moved to action, usually. And that's what makes a difference.
So I think it'd be fair to say that you've worked on hundreds of cases, had hundreds of defendants. Is there any one case or any one story that kind of stands out to you on everything you've done, either it's state or federal? Or
that would be super hard to do. There's so many cases. Just the ones you and I worked with, Gleason and others. It was like, there's no end of stories. Wow. Trying to pick a good one. The rape case was a good, because the character's in it. You remember when we arrested the one guy who's high on LSD and running down the road? I mean, it's just crazy things. The Thai marijuana smuggling case was fascinating, because you basically had international drug smugglers who were importing tons of marijuana from Southeast Asia, Middle East, over a period of decades, that were living in Sun Valley as part of the beautiful people. They had money, status, they had social circles that were amazing. They had so much money, they would ski in Sun Valley, and then in the summer they have money to fly to the Andes and ski the Andes or the Russian Alps, and in between they're at their house overlooking a beach in Maui. They just lived this life of the rich and famous, and they were accepted because they had money, social status, and they had a cover story for why they had money. And it was all a lie. So uncovering decades of stuff that happened in Fiji, Australia, Hong Kong, Thailand, Europe, Hawaii, Idaho, everywhere, was a fascinating thing. Took us all over. Took us to Hong Kong 3 times, Thailand twice, all over the place. And it was very, very fascinating case, because they were really smart and they had money hidden everywhere. We found numbered bank accounts in Hong Kong. We found beach property in Thailand. We seized a resort in Fiji. I mean, it was a fascinating case. Mm-hmm. Other cases were interesting just because they were so awful. People were so awful. They were like really, really bad people. And it was like, to deal with people at that level, people that would kill you in a heartbeat and would kill somebody else in a heartbeat, that was fascinating at a different level. And we had plenty of those. LA gang case in Pocatello. 30 gang members moved to Pocatello from South Central LA, started selling crack cocaine. And these are guys that didn't fit in Pocatello back then. They brought their limo, which didn't exactly fit. They were all tatted up. They had nicknames like Grizzly, Spanky, Junior, Spider. And they opened a store in the mall, Pocatello Mall, called LA Fashions. And in Pocatello, Idaho, this kind of stuff they sold in LA Fashions is stuff Michael Jackson would not wear. It was just weird stuff. But that was their base of operation. Their little homies would be there with their beepers, and they would pretend to be employees, and they'd get beeped out and they'd go. But they were just gang members selling crack. It was a huge thing. And that was fascinating. Anyway, lots and lots of stories.
When did you stop being a prosecutor?
I can't remember what year, but it was before I was eligible to retire.
Yeah. So my question has always been, I always thought you had tons and tons of more cases to do, but you just decided at one point, I'm done, I'm out. Why?
Couple of things happened. Number one, I had always took pride in the fact that my team, our team, played by the rules, and the rules were enforced by the courts, everyone else, that the Department of Justice held us to strict standards, and the rules were applied fairly, and that all laws were applied. Without getting into details, there came a point where the laws were not applied fairly. Emphasis changed from big cases to lots of cases to get lots of numbers. And certain cases were not allowed. I mean, I remember being told to shut down a big case because it's taking too much time. We need more stats. And really, I think the biggest thing that happened was the Department of Justice and the government in general started to say, some laws are important and some are not. And we're going to allow people to commit federal crimes but not pay any attention to it. And so you started to see states pass laws that allowed them to violate dozens of federal laws. And this started with marijuana legalization in California in 1996. And we thought, well, that's California, that's never going to spread. But now look what's happened. Every state that has legalized drugs, and some states have legalized everything from pot to heroin, are doing all of it in violation of federal laws, and nothing happens to them. And our mountains, our national parks, our state forests, public lands are being overrun with cartels that are destroying the environment and committing crimes, and law enforcement's overwhelmed. And all of this is because the feds decided to take a vacation and allow these things to happen. And when I saw that, and I realized that I could not rely on the laws to be applied fairly and uniformly, I started thinking, I've got to get out of here. That was one. But the second and most important one was I had the realization that I had done all that, but that there was something else I was supposed to do that was more important. That's a relative term, not important in a big scheme of things, but for me, to take all of those things I've learned and pass those on to as many people as I could, with the goal of helping people make the right decisions so that they don't make bad choices. And all of those bad choices, one of the hardest things for people to understand is all this money we spend in government. And I'm not talking about defense and that kind of stuff, but most of the money spent at state and local level is spent on choices of people's bad choices. You think about everything that happens in government, all the things we have to do are based on people's choices. How much money do we have to spend because people use drugs or violate laws or don't take care of their kids? We all have to spend money on that. And if we help people make good choices, that frees up taxpayer dollars to do good things. So instead of having to deal with some person that doesn't take care of his kids, sells drugs, becomes addicted, commits crimes, that money is now available to build schools, pay teachers what they're worth, build things. And people don't get that. We just keep allowing people to do dumb things. We create laws and policies that allows them to ruin their lives and people around them. And then we end up cleaning up messes. So the bigger motivation is that feeling the need that I needed to go out there and help people understand that. And I love that. It's a dumb idea to walk away from a high-paying federal job without retirement and without a job to think you're going to make a difference in the world. I still don't have a job. When I'm at a table in a meeting introducing everybody saying, I'm so-and-so from so-and-so, such and such, gets around to me, it says, I'm Monty from my house, because that's literally the case. I kind of go where the wind blows me. And that was not a wise financial move. Shocking to understand that drug prevention is not a highly paid, lucrative employment. But it doesn't matter, because every day I wake up knowing that I have the blessing of using my time in a way that seems to be of the most benefit to the most people. I am a weak, I don't know if weak's the right word. I'm not the smartest, best guy, but I do what I can. So I can feel good at the end of the day that even if I'm not making any money, I'm helping people, and that comes from here. It's a blessing every day. It's not helpful in paying bills, but it's a blessing in many other ways. And people still think I'm crazy. No one could believe I was leaving that job because I loved my job. I loved everybody I worked with. We had the most fascinating lives. I couldn't retire, and I walk away. That's nuts. But I have never, ever regretted it. If anything, I wish I'd started earlier. I missed a few good cases, but I could have started helping earlier.
So a little side note, a little personal question for you. And I don't know when you started, but it seemed like you started when I was working with you, but I'm sure you probably started before this. But you, and I'm sure you're very humble about this, you are a very good professional photographer. Why did you start that?
Oh, I'm glad you asked that question. Because even though I think I'm a very optimistic, kind of happy person, I tend to see the good in people regardless. And I love life and I love people. I love nature. I love doing my job. But through careers like ours, you see things that other people do not have to see. You know about things that are unpleasant. You see dead bodies. You talk to grieving families. You deal with homicide scenes and autopsies. You deal with evil people. You have a tremendous amount of pressure. You know what trial prep would be like for us. We would be all-nighters for weeks.
Well, I know what trial prep was. Trial prep was, we're going to go to trial in 2 weeks, and the night before, we are up until 4 o'clock in the morning, and I am so mad at you for going, why didn't we do this a week ago? So that was trial prep for me with you.
Well, but you can't say that we didn't do a ton of work up to the point.
True.
That whole couple last days of pulling all-nighters was all about, I get motivated by time deadlines. And number two, I lived in mortal fear of not being prepared. So the closer you get to trial, the more you know about what the defense is up to. So there's always things ready to get exhibits ready. And yeah, no, I know you guys all suffered from that. And I apologize.
I just enjoyed the, hey, can you transcribe those 2-3 hour conversations? Yeah, I'm sure that'll take no time at all.
But you know what? You did. And we had a couple other friends that did the same thing. And but I wasn't sitting at home either. We were all doing, and that was painful. And what was the question?
The question was photography. Why did you get involved?
So 20 years into my career, although I didn't think any of this impacted me, I thought, I see that. It's all, it's life, it's interesting. But about 20 years in, our last child had gone away, get married, go to college, and Sandy and I are now home alone. And instead of soccer games and church activities and campouts and all the stuff we'd filled our lives with, it was basically go to work, come home, go to work, come home. And I woke up one day with this scary realization that I was seeing the world as a very dark place. These cumulative experiences that filled my brain, the things I saw, the things I experienced, the people who wanted to do us harm, all of those things had weighed on me till I realized that I was now seeing the world differently than I ever had before. This terrified me because I didn't want to be that way. It changed the way I viewed the world. And so I decided I needed something to flip my brain and make it go back to the way it used to. And had lots of things to think about. One of the things I thought about was taking up photography because I love nature, loved hiking, all of that. So I got me a little cheap film camera. You remember what those are like? People don't even know anymore. You put this film in it and you develop it and you get back and all that. So that's what I started with. Got this little cheap film camera, and when I bought it and started looking through the lens of this camera, everything changed because of instead of having all of this weight piled on me where I kind of viewed the world kind of like this, suspiciously. I go to the grocery store and think, that guy's back. With the camera in my hand, I started looking for everything that was beautiful, unique, awesome, and I'd start snapping pictures of it. I was terrible at it. You know, film, you don't know what you get till they come back. You get film back, and you don't even know what you took a picture of, and if it's bad, you don't even know why. But what it did is it caused, looking through the lens of a camera, I rediscovered this world that was far beyond what was going on in my brain. And I basically rediscovered the world and everything in it. And so I became more and more fascinated with that, more interested, try to get better, mostly just through sad experience, learning slowly, and get better equipment to the point where now I have a website. Now people buy my pictures. I use my pictures in every presentation because when I share bad information or I share serious information, I don't want to leave the kids, the audience, with all of these unsolvable problems and leave them with that. I flip it at the end and I said, now here, these are all the things that are going wrong, but here's the alternative. And I use photography as a way to tell that story. I talk to them about when you're little children, life is full of wonder and awe because everything's new. There's very few people that haven't at some point in their life as a toddler picked the dandelion and brought it into their mom and presented it as the most beautiful flower, beautiful rose, because that in our little minds that is. And if you have a good mom, she goes, yes, that's beautiful, thank you, even though she's thinking, get that out of my yard, we need to kill it. But that's the way we see the world. Everything's new, everything's wonderful. Awe and wonder. You get older, taxes, bills, sickness, work, all of these things kind of pile up, and adults tend to kind of get hunkered down like this, and they start walking past roses. They stop noticing sunsets. They stop paying attention. And so photography's allowed me to open this up, but more importantly, it's given me an opportunity to share things with other people. And so I use that story of being a kid and then rediscovering the world, and then I show them a series of pictures that goes from macro flowers with raindrops on it to wildlife, which is my favorite, to big vistas and all of that. And ultimately I show them pictures of that I didn't take of the Earth, the Sun, Pluto, and nebulas out in space. And the last thing I show them is a picture of deep field space, Hubble telescope, where you got thousands of lights in a tiny point, a speck of the universe. And these lights are not stars, they're galaxies, 1,000 lights in a little tiny space, and they're all galaxies. And I say, how could we ever be bored? And so this is how in the end, this is what it comes down to. When people are addicted to something, anything, drugs, whatever, their worlds collapse to smaller and smaller and smaller until this is their world. This drug that's their friend, their comfort, their social life, their everything. Their universe has collapsed to this. It's super, super sad. My goal in using photography is to open up their eyes to what's around them, because when they do that and they realize that the world is full of infinite, interesting things, all these things that are all things that the drug culture cannot offer, infinitely better. That's my way of giving them an alternative. So whatever they choose that broadens their scope, it returns a sense of awe and wonder to their life that helps them rediscover a joy they had when they're innocent and little. That's what I want to leave people with. And so photography for me is my own healing thing. It's my own therapy, but it is something I can share that hopefully helps other people.
So it sounded like, because that was going to be my question for you, it sounded like it was your own kind of therapy.
It absolutely was.
So the question for you is, it sounds like from when you first started to become a prosecutor to at least some point when you started doing photography, that you kind of had, and you tell me, a change in your optimistic attitude of, hey, everybody's great, everybody's good, to I'm starting to deal with a lot of bad people. Yeah. And did your views on seeing people out in society change? And
it did.
And that's ultimately what drove you to photography.
You think what you experience. If you focus on negative things, you become a negative person. And because of all of these things I saw, I started to see the world as a darker place. I hated that. And so the photography was kind of therapy. But probably more than that, besides my own therapy, at one point I realized that it's the anecdote to a lot of the bad things I'm talking about. I used to give talks for an hour that all it was bad news. This drug does this, and this guy killed this guy, and into a homicide, and blah, 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 and done. Thank you. Have a nice day. And I did that for years because I started giving talks early in my career because education was important. I knew it was important. But I always felt empty at the end. I knew that I had told them a bunch of valuable information, but I had not given them an alternative to that, a solution to that. So when I figured out that photography gave me an opportunity to flip things around and go from this to this, everything changed about my talks. At the end, I can't do these talks without tearing up because I feel it every single time. Doesn't matter if I've given similar talk 1,000 times. If I don't feel it, I'm not helping anyone. So I have to feel it all. And so this is something that now, whatever training I'm doing, whether it's cops or community coalitions or kids, at the end, I feel like I've offered them one way to rediscover joy in their life if they've lost any of it. Someone said the secret to genius is to carry the spirit of a child into old age. And I think that's true. Mm. If you could continue to have wonder and awe for the world you live in, you'll be a happier person. And for me, from a kind of a spiritual point of view, it's an appreciation of the Creator and His creations, and being grateful for that, I think, is something that's important to me. It just gives me I love it. I'm going to take. So whether it's shooting grandkids or going on adventures with grandkids or finding someplace I've never been, if I'm not working, that's what I'm doing. I'm looking for something to see and do. And if people won't go with me, I sadly go by myself. But I always try to get somebody to go because I don't want to do it, but I don't want to experience it myself. I want others to share it. Most people learn not to go with me because it's too much pain or work or whatever. But at least when I'm back, I can share. This is what I saw. Did you know this thing exists in this place? And if you went there, you could see the same thing. But since you can't, here it is. It's fun.
So Monte, if somebody is interested in having you come and speak to them, or if somebody's interested in your photography, where can they get a hold of you?
My website is It's montestiles.com. So it's MONTESTILES. All of my other contact information is there. Email, phone number, everything. People can call me day or night. The website looks more like a photography website because it is galleries of grizzly bears and all this stuff. And I have way too many pictures on there. So if you want to travel the world, just go there and look at all this stuff. But my Facebook page, just look for my name, is I put on pictures with stories. And I love telling the stories because if you post a picture and you don't tell the story, it has less meaning. So I love to tell stories about the pictures. So that's another place. But I don't emphasize sales of pictures. Those just happen. Sometimes a hospital will fill their hospital. Sometimes somebody just wants one for their home. That's not the point of it. The point of all those pictures is to do the same thing I do in talks, is to give people a view of things they may not have been able to experience themselves, and maybe give them an incentive to see those kind of things. The stuff at the top has bio, contact information, presentations, all of the professional training, motivational speaking kind of stuff. And so they can go to one of those and find out what kind of presentations I do, how to get a hold of me. So the whole list of things that I love to talk about. So if you want to know how I may be able to help, and you don't want me to just come and try to fix your kids in an hour, you can go to the montestiles.com, and whether you want to hire me or not, I will help you, because the point is helping, not making a bunch of money. Otherwise, I'd still be an attorney making an obscene amount of money, and but still focusing most of my attention on bad behavior. So
I forgot to ask you this question. I was going to end it there, but I forgot to ask you this question. When you stopped being a AUSA,
yeah.
did you ever think about going and being a defense attorney in private practice?
Oh no. Oh no. Oh my goodness. That would have been a sentence to hell for me. Because then even though everybody has a right to an attorney, they don't have a right for me to be their attorney. So no, when I left, I didn't want to practice law. I wanted to use the information I had that I learned from you and learned from and other agents and even defendants, and help other people. Practicing law was the last thing even though it had been very lucrative. No, it gives me. It kind of gives me a kind of shudder thinking about working for government again, because as you know, in government there are people that say, here's what you do, when you do it, how you do it. In my world, in your world now, we get to go and do the things that are in our heart, where we feel we can do the most good, and that's what we get to do. That's a good feeling. I in some ways, even though I loved all the people I worked with, loved my career, couldn't have had a better career, when I left, I felt like my body, mind, and soul had been released from prison in a weird way, because of all of these restrictions on time. That now I'm free to do what seems to be the most good on any given hour, which this hour apparently is you. That's it. It's just you and me sitting in a room with some lights and your camera, and knowing all the things I know about you, and we're talking about. It's pretty interesting.
It is.
I hope it's interesting to other people. They probably go, why did Niles interview that guy when he just had Tracy Basterchi on? Why would he, or Gleason, why did he interview that guy? Anyway, hopefully help somebody.
Thank you, Monte.
Appreciate you letting me come in and share some old stories.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
You bet.